Hey everybody, Joel Ledlow, Evolution JKD. I'm joined by Ian. Welcome to the podcast, everybody.
Hi, how's it going?
Um, it's going very, very well. I hope it's going great for everybody who is listening. Hey, we've got a bunch of these, so go ahead and listen where you can. Also, check out the other content we have on the channel. There's a lot of other stuff, whether it's a shorts or whether it's Ian and I doing something or discussing something. Interviews, we have interviews. There's also really, really cool whiteboard videos that are up that talk about a lot of the science. Ian and I go into a lot of other things, but in the whiteboard, I discuss and use the whiteboard, yay, drawings for it's like JKD Pictionary,
Yeah,
but with science.
I like those
It's
personally.
kind of fun.
I was gonna say I like those personally. That was something that we did a lot while I was in class with you. But when you have the movement, or you're just observing the movement, a lot of times, especially in the comment section, we get a lot of questions about like, what are you doing and all that. But unless if you kind of have
Hmm.
a breakdown or you have somebody sit down, with something like that and say, hey, this is what we're doing with our body. This is why this works this way. It doesn't help paint the whole picture. And then there's the third part of it, which is going out and doing it yourself. But having those kinds
Yeah.
of explanations and having that kind of thing, even with the punching thing, I thought that was great. The progressive indirect one was something I suggested, and I needed that when I was learning the 5 ways of attack because it's kind of
No.
confusing, was.
And that goes into what we want to do with any of our content is to help you understand. And it may be an idea, it may be the mechanics of a movement, it might be the way this attack can be used or how you're going to score with something. And today's little podcast is going to talk about stances. There's a big debate about stances, and Ian and I are going to sort of jump into that debate. This isn't something that we talk about too in depth. It's not like a big argument for us.
Yeah.
When we're in class, I take students through a progression of things, and you'll hear about us. You'll hear us talk about those things tonight, today, this morning, whenever you happen to be listening to this. It's night for us, but it could be any time for you. So there's a big debate, and I ran across this in some JKD forum where they were discussing that you should have the hands extended. The lead hand should be extended out away from the body, and like a fencer. The other one was you should have your hands up like a boxer. Your hands should be high like a boxer. The other one was the lead hand should be low and the other hand is up and then the shoulder forward. And there's some other variations in there too, but I was pretty astounded that so many of these quote unquote JKD people in this forum were on this massive debate about which was the proper way to stand. My response to that is if you're fucking standing there, you're getting your ass kicked. Like if you're posing and standing in any of those positions, you're just going to get beat up because there's no aliveness to it. And that's an issue. And when you're training, you're going to do it. So, why the hell should you even have a stance then? Ah, that is a good question. And that's one that Ian and I are going to talk about, along with a few other things. So, Ian came up with a good one of it being a reference point. And why don't you talk about that a little bit more?
So in martial arts and anything, you generally have to have a starting point, right? There is always a beginning. And in a regular stance, just with JKD or with any martial art, right? It's okay, well, from this position, this is supposed to be somewhere that is optimal to either cultivate the kind of strength and the kind of places to learn to draw power from, or it's to help guide you to get into a lot of the common movements that are within the rest of the curriculum. But just being like, well, I practice horse stance and kung fu forever, so this is how I'm going to fight is completely like missing the point. And if you do that, then I'm sorry, but you suck. I've never seen somebody who's good stand in a horse stance unless if they're like showing off.
Wait, did you ever see that video? It's like a really old video, and it was made with super huge fun of. And it was some guy in I don't know if it's high school or college or something, and it was like an after school fight at like the basketball courts.
Yeah, I did.
And this guy drops way down into this like really, stereotypical kung fu stance. And everybody's just like, what is this guy doing? I don't even remember. I think the other guy was like, what are you doing? And then just backed off of it. I don't even think there was a fight. But the whole point of that video, and the reason we all remember it, if you've seen it, is because it was just like, what are you doing, dude? Like, are you fighting, or are you like, he
Yeah.
was posing the whole way?
Well, it's important to remember that like people get lucky, and that I think if we're talking about the same video, the guy didn't know how to react the other person, and so he approached him, and then there was
Yeah.
the wild swing and put him on the floor or something like that. But it was clearly like a means of like wishful thinking that his prayer was answered. But it's not to take away though from the other point of, well, does that make horse stance useless? Does that make all of your other, even if you practice traditional martial arts stances,
Hmm.
useless? No, it's a cultivator. When you are working with something in JKD, the reason why one of the primary reasons why we were taught to stand the way we do is because it's the great way to start running. It's very similar to a track runner because you can take off or turn the other way and dip.
Yep.
Does that mean that that's what is always going to happen? Of course not. But we're looking at optimization. We're looking at how do I start to apply these principles of what we have, the four of them, of being efficient, being simple, always thinking ahead, using our longest weapon to our nearest target. And for the research and time and whatever that we put into it, this is just a very practical and a very good place to start to learn how to do that.
Yeah. I think one of my biggest things is I do start with hands up, and I do what would be closer to a boxer stance with the hands up, especially with new people, because they walk around all day long with their hands down. I want them to learn, hey, your hands should be up. You want to protect your head. And I want to encourage that idea in the beginning. Later, the hands move around. Like if you're standing still, like, watch a boxing match. Go watch really good boxers. Go watch, go watch Ali. Go watch Sugar Ray Leonard. Go watch any of the greats out there. And when you see them really moving around and they're really in command of it, they're not sitting with, they're not just tapping their gloves to their cheeks the whole time. Their hands are down. They're not in a quote unquote stance. Yes, they will come from a place that has got good offense and defense that they've worked on and cultivated. But when they're moving, their head's moving, those hands are also moving. And the more efficient they are, the better the boxer. The head will begin to move independently of the hands. So instead of having one grouping or one position, and my right hand stays in this place, and my left hand stays in this place, and my head stays here, no, all three of those can start to move around together. And then you start to have maybe one hand, one hand stays on the face and the other hand moves around. And that becomes that right hand is extended out. Then both hands begin to move around independently. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to this of like, we're not saying that it has to be this or whatever, or you should be jumping around and constantly erratic or something of the sort, because there are a lot of benefits to working from stillness, which is a huge point that Sifu Joel gave to me in my cultivation. But at the same time, when you start engaging with another partner and you start working on your sparring and all that other stuff, like you have to chisel the stone and make yourself become more unpredictable. And the more that you lock into cementing yourself to the floor and staying in one position, then the other person has better mobility than you do. Chances are you're not going to be successful in whatever it is that you're cultivating, or, hopefully not fighting or whatever. You have to teach the stance to become alive. So that way, the way that you move is centered around those guidelines in motion, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to like have a coiled spring forever and only have one attack available or one movement, because that's not how this stuff works.
I think there was a good one in there. You or popped in my head when you said the coming from stillness, and it's a great cultivator to come from stillness because it shows you when you're doing extraneous movements, you're doing extra. You don't need that extra movement, and you can track your body and monitor what's happening during whatever you're doing, a jab, you're doing a front snap kick, whatever it happens to be. But I think maybe a good example is to look at a basketball player or a basketball in movement in a game. Sometimes a player will come to from stillness. They'll have a moment of stillness somewhere, but usually you don't see a player with the ball just stand there and hold it. And even if they're like, even when they're doing a free throw, right? Even if they're doing a free throw, they might hold it for just a moment and then take their shot. But there's no pressure on there. But when they're actually playing against another opponent and it's live and on, and they're going at it, and I'm trying to score, and you're trying to defend and steal the ball and go score yourself, there's not a whole lot of pausing. There are moments, and if you went frame by frame through video, you could find a lot of positions that coaches in basketball will teach. But you're transitioning from position to position to position to position.
I have a really good analogy about this, because
We're all
s-
about analogies. We like
similarly,
analogies.
in something like kung fu or whatever, horse stance is so similar to something like defense position in basketball. I played basketball in high school and all that other stuff, but they would teach you to basically shuffle, where you would pick a foot up and slide your body over. But if somebody is in a full run and you're playing man to man and you try to shuffle over to block them, unless if you're
Mm-hmm.
forcing them into a corner, you are going to lose every single time. You have to match their speed. You have to change the positioning of what you're doing in order to beat them to that baseline. In order to beat them there, then that's when you sit in that stance and don't let them go into that direction. And that's where the other defense is supposed to help you out. But if you are like this the whole time with your hands out, just trying to side over, you're going to get creamed every single time. But
If you're trying to crab across with your hands out and crab shuffle sideways while someone's doing the cheetah sprint across the floor, you can't do it.
it's not going to
You
happen.
have to change into that sprinting stance as well.
But
At least in order to be able to hope to match them.
that's a transition, and I think that's where a lot of people get confused, because they might think that the base starting point is so important that they forget about the fluidity and the adaptation of how to move.
And I think a lot of that goes into what we were talking about. Why do you use a stance? And you touched on it. It's a beginning point, and it's a training methodology. So hey, start here. And if you're learning a jab and a cross, it makes a little bit more. What's a jab? What's the front hand? What's a cross? That's the rear hand. Okay, they're straight. Okay, great. Lead hook. Okay, great. Well, if you're going to do jab into pendulum front snap kick, that works better from this fighting stance. And you begin to have ways that you can teach movements and help a student explore those movements. So it's just about ease of learning. And then the whole idea is you learn the movements, you understand the movements, you explore variation inside of that movements through various ways, whether it's pad drills or whatever. And then you begin sparring and people start monkeying with it because the other person's not standing still anymore. They move to the right and you're like, ah, crap, I got to go with them. And, I'm going to do my little push shuffle. Wait a minute. We talked about that. You're a crab and they're like jumping over there. You got to deal with it. Or if I'm going to stand there, I'm going to be in my cool stance and they like just tackle you.
Yeah.
Where's your stance now? Now you're on the ground. How is it effective? Those are good questions and those should be explored. But I think if you're trying to go, should I stand this way or stand that way, and just hunker down and this is the way I'm going to be for the whole thing, we have talked about video games and the benefits of them, but it's a fight is not a video game. You don't have a character who poses and just stands there. I loved when I was in university, the arcade games that we had were Street Fighter 2. I know I'm dating myself a little bit here, but Street Fighter 2, and I loved it. And you had the different characters who posed in different ways, and you had music, begin, and you are fighting and coming through, and this character stood that way, and that character stood this way, and that was how they stood through the video game. Well, guess what? It's a video game. The people who were animating it and doing the programming, they were limited.
Right.
That's not how real fights happen. Real fights are going to be fluid and change through all of that. You're going to have more variety unless you win the fight. If you stand there and someone throws a punch and counter with one punch and you knock them down, well, that's all you're going to see. I'm not going to show you everything else I have. I don't need to. I've already won.
Well, a
There
lot
you
of
go.
that stuff too is dramatized to show the character's background or uniqueness or identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that is important for us to discuss because a lot of people try to associate the way that they stand with their martial identity, where somebody who's really good
Oh, that's a good point.
just moves. And I think that is the trap that people get into.
Ooh. So we could come back to opponent. I was going to talk about opponents, but I something else we talked about is, why is it a big question in the JKD circles? And Ian, I think you really hit it. Why is that such a big question? Why are we supposed to stand this way or that way? And I think it becomes their Jeet Kune Do, I was going to say JKD, but their Jeet Kune Do identity,
Yeah.
their martial identity in this greater JKD world. Am I original JKD? I have to stand this way, or I'm concepts
Concepts,
JKD. I
yeah.
have to stand that way.
Kali,
But I think, like you said, it's like, well, why do you have to stand like that anyway? Like the whole point is to be able to like fight and not worry about it.
Can I interrupt you
But
for just a
I
second?
think
Sorry.
you bet.
What
We're
was
about to fucking not drink our tea on this shit. I can feel it coming.
like just I think that it's a good point, but you told me this story, but what did Jerry say or what did Jerry tell you that Bruce told him to do whenever like he was learning JKD? He said Bruce told me to stand like this, right? Or something like that.
I'm not sure what you're talking about on that one. Do you want to go more on that? Dude, there's like too much.
No, no
Like, man,
worries.
I worked with a guy for like 4 years and we've been together for all like 12
Twice.
years.
Yeah,
I don't even
almost
know
three
what.
times. So I'm going to
It,
paraphrase, but when we were talking about stance, and we've revisited this several times, Sifu Jerry was telling you this story, and he was like, "Yeah, when we asked Bruce how we should stand, he said we stand like this. And you step forward with your with your foot, hands go up, back heel is up, everything goes forward, and that was just a ready stance."
oh, so just getting into our basic Baijian or fighting stance or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, if you're just standing, you just step forward, boom, and it's really just aggressive.
Yeah,
I got to see Jerry show me lots of different moves, but they were usually, which is going to tie us back into what I mentioned earlier of opponents, and it would depend on who he was moving with. And he'd say, "Hey, I was moving with this person. The drill was you're supposed to follow back with the lead leg kick, but they were too fast and their legs were too long and they moved too far back too quickly. I couldn't catch them, so I had to follow through with the rear leg." Or I was doing a shoulder roll, but I had to move this way because so and so was doing it. So I had to turn it a little bit more with my elbow and get a bit more aggressive to like pop it so I could return the cross. And these were inside of drills working with other guys at the school. And he was adapting things and just sharing some of the ways that he had to adapt what it was into the given circumstances. So, what was the opponent giving him? Why did you have your hand high? Well, because this was happening. Why did you have your hand low? Well, because this is what happened. So, what are you got to fit in is the main thing. And if you're
yeah,
so preoccupied and so looking to identify to a social group and prove to other people I belong to group whatever because I stand like this, then you're really missing the whole point of martial arts and Jeet Kune Do, which is for self-expression, not group expression. I don't want to be looking like everybody else. I want to be looking like me. Now, here's the thing I think is like begging to ask, but I'm going to finish with this one before I
no,
let him take it. Here's the common denominator, I think, for Jeet Kune Do, not how you stand, but how you hit people. If you hit the other person and every movement is me trying to hit, what is your answer? To hit. Nobody gives a shit about your stance. We care about whether you're hitting or not. If you're standing, you're not hitting.
right. Because everything
And my
is think
only
hit. everything is a hit.
Yeah, everything in your stance should be about being prepared. Like you want to say, well, we step forward to go through. Yeah, your hands are seeking, but man, I'm going to then be shifting it automatically to whatever it is that my opponent gives me. So if my opponent moves a certain way, my hands are going to shift and my stance is going to adjust automatically. You see this in football with, the offense is there and they do a formation and they come up, well, they're in a stance. The defense starts shifting. You'll see them shift to it. And then they'll go through their clash. Now that's sport and it's football and it's a moment in time that's held with preparation, but it's something that we can look at pretty commonly and go, hey, I know what that looks like. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Now imagine that one moment being just a constant series of moments instead of this one big prolonged one.
I think that this is a really good point to like, kind of just observe what we just said, because this ties into all of that stuff that you read in the books of, use what's useful and all that other stuff. The reason why you start with a stance, especially in our system of JKD, is because we're trying to demonstrate, at least of what modern science has to offer, of what is the most efficient way to use your body that generates the most force with the least amount of effort, energy spent, blah, 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 all that stuff. But something that Sifu Joe taught me when I first started class was you learn the structure and then you learn to break the structure. And what that meant to me
Mm-hmm.
was that sometimes that structure is not good enough or does not qualify to problem solve the adversity that's in front of you, and you have to be creative to and adapt with what that issue is. But if you are so rigid, especially to the point where you're still trying to figure out how to stand, then that's the whole thing that we're saying about missing the point. Because when you're moving with somebody, whether it be through partnership or it be through adversarial, that other person is generally alive,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to train
So
that way.
here's a good question. All these people are going, well, you got to stand this way. No, you have to stand that way. Okay, what happens if you're just standing around like a normal person and someone throws a fist at you, right? Someone's like punching at your face and you are standing there with your hands down, just chatting away with somebody, and all of a sudden, someone lunges at you with a big old hand. Oh, hold on, freeze, pause. I hold on. I'm going to back up. Can you go back over there, and then I'll turn around and get in my stance. It's not going to happen, man. Like it's a training model. If
Right.
you're going to bow and you're going to move around, you're basically all systems are green and you're fully armed, and all systems go. Here we go. Everything is up and running full force. But I actually teach it quite often. How do you come from just standing and then come into it? Yes, and then we flow back into, or I won't say back into, but back through a stance, but it's a reference point. It's a waypoint. Just like if you're doing high outside reference point, or you're doing a double outside reference point or double inside reference point, it's just a reference point. If you're doing like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and you're like, okay, we're going to go from, I'm going to go down on my knees and I'm going to be inside your guard. And we're going to do it. Okay, we're going to work from a full mount. Okay, we're going to work from a half guard.
Right.
Okay, you're going to do from whatever. We're going to come from a clench. If you're in wrestling, oh, you're going to be on top position, bottom position, you're going to be neutral. Those are just starting positions. And then, like, because wrestling is massively alive. Go watch some videos on that.
I think that it's really important, and I actually, thinking about it in retrospect, appreciate that people see the stance as more of an artistic expression. But in any stance that you do, let's just say within the world of martial arts, because what I'm thinking of is, imagine that question that Sifu Joe asked you, but you don't know how to find stability. You don't know how to generate power. You don't know all of these things of what this stance is supposed to teach you. So it's not saying that you should just say, screw it and jump around and whatever. But once you understand
Mm-hmm.
what it means to be stable, once you understand what it means to have the optimum output that your body can produce, then you bring it into the place of aliveness. Then you break that structure.
I think that goes into a good point. And I teach this in my beginning classes. Is a lot of people come in and they want to cover up. and I see this, like, I'm gonna cover center. I'm
Guard
gonna
the
have my hand
groin,
up in
yeah,
this
all that
guarded
stuff.
position. It's like,
Right.
well, but you don't even know how, like, you can barely stand up. You're brand new. You don't know what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense. If you're trying to learn the mechanics, why don't we just learn, like, hey, I'm gonna have put one foot in front. It makes me a little bit more, it's kind of the idea of running, that sprinter stance. I can be quick and explode from point A to point B, and I can close the distance over a short distance pretty damn quickly, right? I can lunge out just like a fencer would. Having one foot in front, we can explode more, right? When they take off the blocks in track, they have one foot in front. They may be on blocks, and they're not very much, but it's still, they take off and then it's one foot in front. When we're going into these things, we want to look at them. We're always coming back to that. So we need to get stability. And then, everyone wants to close off your center. Well, no one's kicking you in the balls when you're first learning push shuffle, right? There's
Right.
nobody there. So why close off against something that's not going to happen? There's no threat. So instead, learn it to its fullness. Learn the movement properly. Understand that movement, and then later when you're faced with an opponent, you can then manipulate, and I was talking about this earlier, you can shift things to fit into that circumstance. You can adjust those things on your own to fit into whatever. Are they trying to kick me in the balls the whole time? Okay, I'm going to change my stance to adjust for that. Are you really quick with hands and it's just, someone's coming in with just their hands? I'm going to adjust to that.
If it's okay with you,
If I have a longer, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, if it's okay with you, I kind of want to clarify what that, like, what you're describing, because I get it. But when you're first learning to walk, you know, let's say you are afraid of something hitting your knee or something, so you start cultivating walking with duck feet or pigeon toed or whatever, right? We all know and can agree that that's not optimal, or you're duck footed, whatever. All 10 toes toward the target is our starting point. Everything is going towards your target. And so when you're working on this, you just
Hmm.
step forward, like Sifu Joel says. But if you are stepping into stance because you're pigeon toed, your body is not able to find its potential before you start considering those safeguards that might not even
how
be
can you
necessary.
how can you find efficiency in a movement when you begin from a position that hinders
Yeah.
your natural efficiency? If you're not tapping into your, and Jerry said, Bruce called this primary freedom, and we want to get back to that. And that's our animalistic. You don't see cats fucking debating how they're supposed to stand. You don't see wild animals going, well, I really think that we should stand this way, or I think we should stand that way. Hawks don't go, well, really, you're swooping down the wrong way. That's not how you're supposed to swoop down and catch the rabbit. And the other one's like, what are you talking about? Like, I caught a rabbit. I don't give a shit what you're saying.
Right.
What's the goal? The goal is to swoop down and catch a rabbit, not flare your wings this way. Like, no, you're looking at the end result, but we have to begin at the beginning. And I guess one of the things is, we'll sort of wrap this up in, when you're looking at stance and you hear people, especially in the Jeet Kune Do world, if it's in another world, I'm not as aware of it. Sorry, I'm just not. I try not to be aware of it too much in the JKD world. But if they're going into this, usually if they're really focused on, you got to stand this way or that way, number one, they're probably just a fan club and they want to pose. And then great, good on you. I know a lot of those people. There's some people out there who are like, quote unquote, experts. They're really just fan clubs. It's like, if you see someone going, look at me with my book, look at me with my poster, look at me with a picture,
Right.
they're a curator. That's a museum custodian or a curator. You're I think there's another word for that, but tell me in the comments what it is, along with your own ideas on stance in this. But I also think that people who are focused on stance either are non-fighters or haven't cultivated their own, or haven't progressed in their own training far enough. For me, if your reason for doing something is because it was written down in a book or you saw someone standing like that in a picture, you're a fucking idiot. So I don't give a shit what the book is. You want to go in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do and you want to go do something and stand and lock yourself into a position just because Bruce wrote a note somewhere one time and someone else put it into a book for him or for us after he died, and then you're going to hinder yourself. I think, Bruce is rolling in his grave for that. It's completely opposite of everything else
Right.
he's been known for saying. There's no freedom in that. There's no expression in that. There's no aliveness in that. And that is important. Like if you're trying to make yourself into a statue, that flies full in the face of Jeet Kune Do. And I think any martial art, no matter what you're doing, if you're locking into it. Sorry, gang, it's not Karate Kid. You're not doing the crane stance. That's really cool. I loved that movie when I was watching it as a kid, the
And it,
original.
and another thing about
But
this and this is probably my drink your tea moment that really just annoys me because people just don't think about this shit is like, have you ever written a note and you still have it, but like it's outdated, or you've written another note or just
mm-hmm.
forgot to throw it away, but maybe somebody else stumbles upon it and they're like, this is it. Like, that's what I feel like this whole fucking book has been in a lot of ways. Like, are there some good things in there to consider? Absolutely. But like, it is a note. It is a note, a drawing. It was something that he was thinking about at that moment in time. And he could have.
So here's another one. If you're going to a book, if you have to reference a book for your information, I won't say it's bad. I just say if you're, because I used to reference my notes all the time. I would go and I have a notebook with some notes when I was training with Jerry, and I would have those and with some other people too. And I would go back, but that was in the beginning. That was when it wasn't part of me. And once it became part of me, I didn't need to go back and check that book. I don't need to go back and reference it or to double check my answers because I know my answers.
But also, your notes came from your experiences and the wonder
Mm-hmm.
that you had. You didn't start by writing notes down and then using that as your and for some reason a lot of people think that they're going to read this fucking book and be like, "Oh, I get it." Like, it's not going to happen.
I got to give you one of those that Jerry told me. He said Bruce had done all of these things. I think he was still in Oakland, and Bruce had shared this with him at some point. And it was all in self-defense. Bruce had done all these photos and he'd written up all this stuff for self-defense. And then he was doing his own progression. At that time, he was really starting to cultivate and really have a lot of personal breakthroughs. And he literally took all these pictures from this whole project that he did and he tossed them all in a box and was like, because they're outdated now, and
Yeah.
left them. Well, after he died, it was, everybody was like, give me more Bruce Lee stuff, give me more Bruce Lee stuff. So they took this stuff out and then turned it into a book. Because it's amazing that the guy really I think Bruce only published one book, and I could be mistaken about that. And that's a Wing Chun book
Mm.
as a,
Wing Chun practitioner.
what is he? He's a technical editor on Wing Chun by J. Yim Lee, by James Lee. And so he's a technical editor on that book. I think that's the only book that he was ever actually worked on during when he was alive. All these other books were like Bruce Lee this, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
They're not they're not actually him writing a book. It might be from his notes, but I can tell you for sure I have quite a lot of notes. And I've gone back through some of my notes and gone,
That doesn't work anymore, or
yeah,
I was like
that's
not in the
that's
right ballpark, or I was not.
or it's limited.
Yeah, or
It's
it's
limited. Like
limited.
what I do now is way more than that. And I think that's the same thing. Oh, well, stance, you have to be in this stance. Okay, well, but don't limit yourself. And I see that a lot. I'm pretty sure that's somewhere with Bruce, like with limits. I feel that's in there a lot. We're gonna end this up. I would love to hear from all of you. What do you think about stances? What do you think about the podcast? What are some other things that you would like to hear us discuss? And, here's a challenge for you. I got a challenge. So the whole idea of drink your tea is it's so controversial that we have to be like, drink your tea and don't open your mouth because it's
Yeah.
going to open up a big can of worms. Can you give us something that would be daring enough that we should probably drink our tea, but we'll talk about it on the podcast anyway?
Yeah.
Go ahead and put that in
Spicy.
the comments. Let us know. And it'd be some kombucha with some tea,
Hey, it's tea.
something in there.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this. Please check out our other content. We've got lots of cool stuff. And this channel is really, we don't always hit the mark, but we are always trying to share information. And our opinions should be taken as that. We are experts in this particular field, but we are sharing only our opinions. And we always hope that you will explore movement and ideas on your own and come to your own conclusions. And just you can use us as a resource to help you along the way. And if we're not being a positive source, then let us know, because our whole goal is to be a positive source for everybody.
Or just drink your tea and hit the like button.
Or just drink your tea, shut up, and hit the like button. Maybe share it. Tell your friends.
That'd be nice.
You
Thanks,
can do all
everybody.
those. Bye.